When LeBron passes up Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in points, and he will this year, will that make him the greatest player ever? Okay. An interesting question. I think the greatest player is Michael Jordan.
LeBron doesn't have that gene.
Hold on. You said LeBron James the greatest player ever?
Ever.
What about Michael and Kobe? So you just gonna pass Kobe up like that?
I'm gonna pass Kobe up. I'm gonna look at Michael. I'm gonna look at the.
I knew it. Patron America.
Yo.
Patron America.
Kobe Bryant couldn't fill, or Michael Jordan fill LeBron's shoes. The impact that he's had with different teammates, different organizations.
Would you be mad at me if I just walked up the show?
The energy inside Madison Square Garden had barely settled when everything suddenly erupted. Not the scoreboard, and not some routine post-game interview making rounds online. This felt deeper, more intense, and far more personal than any headline ESPN could push out before the night ended. The Lakers were outplayed by the Knicks 112-100. A defeat messy enough that it should have dominated every conversation. A 12-point loss, a rough night on the road, a team that looked lost and out of sync for most of the game. Yet by the moment the locker room doors opened, the focus had completely shifted. No one cared about the stat sheet anymore. No one mentioned the turnovers, the defensive lapses, or whatever explanations the coaching staff might offer while facing reporters in the hallway.
I'm gonna say one thing to you, Max. I don't know the numbers like you do. Michael Jordan is what in the finals? 6 and what?
Oh.
And what is LeBron in the finals? That's all I gotta say.
Shaq, how many games?
What everyone was focused on instead was the tunnel, what went down inside it, and the fact that Shaquille O'Neal, all 400 pounds of legacy and intensity, was reportedly standing there waiting. Not in his role as a broadcaster, not as a former teammate, but as someone who felt a line had been crossed and refused to ignore it any longer. That moment alone made it clear this situation had grown far beyond basketball. Much bigger than that. To understand it, we have to go back, because this didn't begin at Madison Square Garden. It started days earlier with a microphone, a podcast setup, and LeBron James sharing thoughts that were likely intended to sound insightful but instead hit the old-school audience like a grenade already in motion. LeBron was doing what he usually does, speaking at length with full confidence. The discussion shifted to the modern game, how it has changed, how players' bodies are different, the demands are higher, and injuries have evolved. He argued that soft tissue injuries, especially calf strains, come from how the game is now played, with more sprinting, more spacing, and more side-to-side movement at speeds the sport has never seen before. On the surface, that reasoning is not unreasonable. Sports science has supported similar ideas. The pace is faster and the court feels more open than ever. If you look at it purely from a medical standpoint, LeBron's argument holds weight. But what he seemed to overlook was the audience. He was not speaking to medical experts. He was speaking to the internet. And the internet does not process nuance. It reacts to headlines. And the headline many from the older generation heard was simple. The modern game is tougher, which suggests the past game was easier, and by extension, the players from that era were easier too. That is not what LeBron James actually said, but it is exactly how many people took it. And that difference between what was spoken and what was understood is where emotions from past legends begin to ignite. Shaquille O'Neal heard it, there was no doubt about that. And Shaq has never been the type to hear something and simply let it pass without a reaction. He took that moment personally. For him, this was never about sports science or modern analysis. It was about legacy, and more importantly, about whose legacy was being quietly reshaped during a casual podcast moment that suddenly carried much bigger weight. To truly understand Shaq's reaction, you have to see that it is not driven by pettiness or by a need to stay relevant through conflict with current stars. His frustration runs deeper than that. It is philosophical, built on a strong belief about what the game used to be and what it demanded from those who played it. Shaq came from a time when the rules were different, not just in numbers or statistics, but in ways players felt physically every single night on the court.
LeBron is about to do something that hasn't been done in a long time, and I think he will move his name up there. But for me, it's always Dr. J and Michael Jordan.
Hand checking was allowed, meaning defenders could guide a ball handler with a forearm like they controlled the moment. Hard fouls were judged with a level of freedom that let intimidation become part of the defensive identity. Playing in the post was not just physical, it was a constant battle, A real exchange of elbows, shoulders, and body blows that today would likely lead not only to fouls but even suspensions. And then there is the mental side of it, which is where Shaquille O'Neal truly builds his argument. There was a certain fear inside arenas during those years that feels different from what we see now. Not because today's players lack greatness, because they clearly have it, but because the culture surrounding the game has evolved. The tunnel walks, the fashion moments, the pre-game respect and handshakes, all of that reflects a league that expresses competition differently. In earlier times, the mindset was about breaking your opponent's confidence before the game even began. Michael Jordan did not greet rivals warmly before tip-off. He studied them with the mindset of taking them apart piece by piece. Kobe Bryant brought an intensity to practice that could unsettle even his own teammates. And Shaq himself carried a presence that felt like psychological pressure the moment he stepped on the floor. Opponents were not simply trying to stop him, they were trying to make it through the game against him. These were completely different kinds of challenges, and the core difference between them was fear. So when LeBron James even slightly suggested that today's athletes deal with a tougher environment than those who played before, what Shaquille O'Neal heard was not a medical breakdown. What he heard instead was the idea that this era has created something greater than the past ever did. And that is exactly where the tension sparks into something bigger. Now shift to what reportedly happened in that tunnel. People present in Madison Square Garden after the final buzzer described the scene as intentional. Not a meeting, not two icons crossing paths by chance and exchanging a few heated words. It felt planned, like Shaq had already made up his mind before the game even ended that this discussion would happen face to face that night. Witnesses say he was standing there, still and focused, waiting with purpose, the way someone waits when they have already gone over every word in their head and are just expecting the moment to arrive. Then LeBron, coming off a tough loss, steps into that hallway and is suddenly met by the most physically dominant figure the league has ever seen, standing directly in his way with something serious on his mind. That moment is worth pausing on because we are used to an era where tension between players and legends plays out online, through tweets and hot takes, with everyone seated comfortably and producers nearby making sure nothing crosses the line. There are always boundaries, always a camera rolling, always someone ready to smooth things over before it turns into real conflict. But in that tunnel, there were no limits. It was just two individuals and a conversation that had been building not for days, but for years. The tension between Shaquille O'Neal and LeBron James is not something new. It has quietly existed in the background of NBA culture for a long time. Every time the greatest of all time debate resurfaces, every time someone labels LeBron's era as the ultimate version of the sport, every time an opinion downplays the physical intensity of the 1990s compared to today's game, Shaq has heard it all and never fully accepted how those conversations tend to frame his generation as an unfinished version of what came later. So that tunnel was never just about one podcast comment. It represented the buildup of every perceived or real slight finally meeting the right moment and place. And when you bring Michael Jordan into this discussion, it adds another layer entirely. Because Jordan sits at the center of why this situation escalated the way it did once LeBron's words touched on the evolution of the game. This was never only about injuries or play style. It stepped directly into one of the most sensitive debates in basketball history, questioning whether the league Jordan dominated was truly as demanding as many believe, and that kind of question becomes explosive the moment it reaches someone like Shaq.
When I look at LeBron, he's not what Michael was as a player. He's not even what Kobe Bryant was as a player. So, when you talk about trying to compare Michael's instinct, his ability to take over games, his ability to want to have that last shot.
And demoralize you.
Yes.
And scare the living hell out of you.
LeBron doesn't have that gene.
Because for Michael Jordan, in Shaquille O'Neal's view, he is not just another player, he is the standard that every era gets measured against. Jordan represents the idea that fear, dominance, and mental intensity are the highest forms of greatness this game can produce. He proved that through his actions, through the way he played, and through how opponents later spoke about him in quiet, almost cautious tones, showing that true greatness in basketball is about leaving a lasting impact on a player's confidence. You do not just defeat opponents on the scoreboard when facing Jordan. You stay with them long after the game ends. They go home replaying every moment, unable to shake what just happened. That is what the era Shaq came from valued most. So when LeBron James even indirectly suggests that today's game has surpassed that level because of spacing, strategy, and modern data, it is not seen by Shaq as a simple basketball opinion. To him, it feels like history is being dismissed under the cover of analytics. What many people are not fully considering is how this moment could affect LeBron's reputation beyond the public stage. The real impact does not come from interviews or media reactions, but from private conversations, what players say in locker rooms, what coaches admit in honest moments, and what veterans tell younger athletes about what real competition looks like. Those discussions happen away from cameras, in practice gyms, barbershops, and personal messages between people who have lived the game at the highest level. In those settings, a moment like the tunnel is not corrected or softened, it becomes part of the story. And when it comes to LeBron's legacy, there has always been one lingering question, not about championships or numbers, but about the idea of fear. The question now is whether LeBron James, despite everything he has accomplished over more than 2 decades and across multiple teams, truly made opponents feel fear in the same way Michael Jordan once did. Not just respect, but that deep, unsettling fear where players later admit they could not even sleep the night before facing him because they already expected what was coming. LeBron has delivered unforgettable moments, from the iconic chase-down block in Game 7 to the incredible 2016 Finals comeback that defied expectations. But the discussion Shaquille O'Neal is pushing into the spotlight is whether flashes of greatness are equal to the kind of constant psychological control that defined Jordan's era. Supporters of LeBron will argue that this comparison is not entirely fair, pointing out that the game has evolved and that respect now exists in a different form, where players are also collaborators, business partners, and part of a shared celebrity culture. That argument holds weight. However, Shaq's response is that if the standards are changed and then used to claim the highest level of greatness, there should at least be honesty about that shift. And that idea cuts deep. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, the cultural impact of this moment reaches far beyond basketball. What Shaq did in that tunnel represents something very specific, a legend stepping forward to defend what he believes is the true standard of greatness. And when figures like that take a stand, it resonates not just with players or analysts, but with countless people who have never even played the game yet still feel connected to its history and meaning. This kind of moment travels far beyond the arena, showing up in barbershops from Atlanta to Chicago to Compton to Brooklyn, and in conversations between fathers and sons who grew up watching Michael Jordan and are now watching LeBron James, each side holding strong opinions about what true greatness really means and whether the present honors the past. At its core, this is not just about basketball history, it is about generations, about how different eras define toughness, respect, and what is owed to those who built the foundation of the game. Shaquille O'Neal standing in that tunnel carries significance because he represents more than just a former player. He symbolizes an entire era. He is living proof that a time of intense physical competition created figures who are still present, still outspoken, and not interested in quietly stepping aside while their legacy gets reshaped. And that resonates with many people. Not because anyone is wrong for appreciating what LeBron has achieved, because his career stands among the most extraordinary in all of team sports. His longevity is remarkable. His ability to adapt his game as his athleticism evolved, going from a dominant young force in Cleveland at 19 to a highly intelligent playmaker still contributing deep into his later years, all of that is undeniable. But being extraordinary and being the greatest of all time are not the same discussion. The debate about the greatest has always carried a deeper layer, one that goes beyond statistics and championships, focusing instead on what a player leaves behind when they step off the court, not just numbers, but the impact of their presence and how it shaped everyone around them.
An interesting question. I think the greatest player is Michael Jordan. That's what I think. But
whether opponents felt it in their chest before tip-off, whether just seeing number 23 warming up on the far end of the floor created a kind of pressure that even the most elite competitors had to mentally prepare for, that feeling is real. It will never appear in a box score, but according to players from that era, it absolutely existed. And Shaquille O'Neal saying it face-to-face in that Madison Square Garden tunnel is essentially him voicing what an entire generation of players has quietly believed for years. The question now is what happens next.